The mahogany desk still held our father's cologne when my brother slid termination papers across it like a winning hand. The company needs to evolve beyond your limited capabilities, Big Sister Marcus said, smiling for the all-hands cameras waiting next door. I squared the pages until their corners were perfect and looked at the wall of family photos, loyalty behind glass. 15 years of code pulsed beneath this building, routing freight on 3 continents by rules only I knew by muscle memory. Is this really your first move as managing director? I asked. First of many. I smiled, not surrender recognition. He had no idea what happens when you rip out a beating heart. By the time he said, "Human resources has processed everything," my face had settled into the neutral mask that 15 years of corporate politics had carved there. Marcus leaned back in our father's chair, trying on the posture along with the title. "You'll have 2 weeks severance." He continued tapping his tablet. "Credentials remain active until end of day tomorrow, so you can tie up loose ends." "Of course," I said. My voice was even. The only betrayal was a precise tremor in my fingertips as I lifted the pen. I signed where the tabs told me to sign. The click of the pen cap sounded like a latch closing on an old trunk. He didn't stand to shake my hand. He was already looking past me at a calendar invite labeled Novatech Kickoff. Through the glass wall, I could see 2 consultants in identical charcoal suits, setting up a sleek deck in the conference room. A slide flickered, seamless migration from legacy systems. The word seamless made me want to laugh. I had written Core X when the company was still operating out of 2 dusty warehouses and a rented server closet. It wasn't pretty, it was efficient. An integrated platform that handled real-time routing dynamic pricing inventory, forecasting, exception handling vendor audits modules layered over a decade like rings in a tree. Every layer documented just enough to keep us moving, every shortcut living in the heads and hands of the small team I trained. And in mine, most of all. I hadn't built back doors or traps. I didn't have to. Complex systems protect themselves when they're handled carelessly. Lauren Patel from HR waited outside his office, the offboarding checklist cradled like a shield. She'd been here 6 months long enough to know my name, not long enough to understand why operations managers treated me like a fire extinguisher and a prayer. "Elena, I'm sorry," she said, voice pitched low. "I have a few items, badge return, laptop serials, company property." "You'll get everything," I said. "You always do." She flushed. "Protocol says I should request the master override password." "It's in the documentation," I lied gently. "Marcus has access." Her pen hovered. "Right. Documentation." I packed my office methodically, the succulent I kept alive through 3 product launches, the lanyards from conferences where I learned as much in hallway conversations as in keynotes, a photo of my father and me standing in front of the first rack of servers. We bought his hand heavy on my shoulder, pride bright in his eyes. He used to say the world would run on information more than steel. He hadn't been wrong. He just hadn't planned for the moment when information would be something he didn't fully understand. As I closed my laptop, Core X's admin console glowed in the dim light. To most employees, it was a friendly dashboard, color-coded shipments, ETA heat maps, billing projections. Behind that lived a lattice of health checks, dependency graphs, and integrity sentinels that woke like guard dogs at the scent of corruption. I brushed my fingers over the trackpad, as if over an instrument I knew by touch. Then I shut it down. The walk to the elevator felt like the last lap of a marathon. Colleagues looked up, then away, the universal choreography of pity. Naomi Brooks from Client Services caught my eye and stepped into my path. "Tell me this is a rumor." "It's a decision," I said. "Rumors are kinder." Her jaw tightened. "Marcus is courting Westbridge. 15 million a year kind of courting. He wants to show them Novatech's magic." "Magic is great," I said, "until it meets reality." She squeezed my arm and let me go. In the lobby, the marble floor reflected a version of me. I rarely paused to see a woman with a calm mouth and tired eyes, hair pulled back, not for style, but for work. Outside, late winter air slapped my cheeks awake. Pittsburgh's sky was its usual steel gray, the Monongahela, running brown and relentless in the distance. I stood on the steps with my box, and for the first time in years, didn't feel the tug of incoming problems trying to pull me back upstairs. The quiet was terrifying and intoxicating. That evening, Richard called. "Your brother tells me you were professional." He began as if I'd been a vendor completing a contract. I returned everything I said. "You raised me to do that." Silence on the line, then the gravel of his sigh. "Marcus has energy the board responds to. We need to appear modern, Elena." "We need to be reliable," I said. "Clients prefer trucks that arrive over decks that sparkle." He made a small sound, either agreement or fatigue. "You built genius, kiddo, but the board hears legacy, and they start to itch. Then teach them the difference." He didn't answer that. We spoke around the thing we both knew he had chosen succession by charisma and left competence to fend for itself. When we hung up, I stared at my ceiling and let the hurt rise and crest and finally break like a wave that had been building since the first time Marcus called my code homemade in a meeting. The next 2 days unfolded like a vacation I hadn't asked for. I slept past 6. I ran along the river trail and felt the burn in my legs instead of in my inbox. I ate breakfast off a plate rather than over a keyboard. I answered recruiters who had somehow already learned my status. Daniel Ortiz at Horizon Logistics all but sang into the phone, promising resources and respect. "You built a miracle inside Carterline," he said. "Come build one here with your name on the door." I told him I'd consider it, and I meant it. On the second night, I dreamed of the server room. The hum, the cool air, the way the status lights blinked like city constellations. I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth and a steadier pulse. My world had resisted change for years because I feared what would happen if I stopped holding it together. Now I had proof if I let go, the sky didn't immediately fall. It simply grew wide enough for me to choose how to fly next. My earliest memories aren't of dolls or playgrounds, they're of numbers. Rows of them scribbled on legal pads, while my father sat at his desk running figures for fuel costs and delivery times. I must have been 8 when I asked him why one number didn't match the next. He blinked, then pulled me onto his lap and showed me the concept of margins. That was the first time he looked at me, not just as his daughter, but as a potential partner. By 12, I had my first computer. Not a shiny new machine like the ones other kids bragged about, but a beige box with more missing keys than working ones. My father, Richard Carter, had salvaged it from a closing factory. "See what you can make of it," he said. I did. I spent nights figuring out how to make simple inventory lists respond to commands. The glow of the monitor felt like companionship. It hummed with possibility. While Marcus thrived under Friday night lights, tossing footballs and winning trophies that earned applause at country club dinners, I was happiest debugging a stubborn line of code. He came home with grass stains and cheers. I came home with coffee rings on my notes and eyes red from staring at screens. My mother used to sigh, telling me to be more balanced. But Dad saw something else. One day, he told me the world will run on information more than steel. You'll help us stay ahead of the curve. By the time I finished college, Carterline had grown from 2 trucks to a regional presence. But its software, outdated, clunky, purchased off the shelf from some vendor in Chicago. When a system crash threatened a major new client, I stayed 3 sleepless nights in the server room, fueled by vending machine coffee and stubbornness. What I built in that crisis wasn't polished, but it worked. Better than what we'd been paying 6 figures for. That was the birth of Core X. Richard didn't hesitate. "Build it for us," he said, sliding me a budget line like it was both a blessing and a dare. Something that fits exactly how we work. I still remember the rush diagramming workflows on giant sheets of paper, sketching modules, testing snippets of code until the sun rose. With every feature, I added real-time shipment tracking, automated billing, vendor scoring. The company became leaner, sharper. My system wasn't just software, it was cartilage knitting the bones of Carterline together. When I unveiled Core X at a board meeting, I thought they'd be thrilled. Some were. Others looked baffled, as though I'd spoken another language. Marcus, home from business school, leaned back with that smile he'd perfected. "Impressive," he said, his tone making it sound like a science fair project. but scalable? Or is this just, hobby solution? Our father cut him off. It's saving us millions. That's what it is. For a while, balance held. Marcus dazzled investors with polished decks about synergies and market disruption. I kept Core X humming, patching, expanding, adapting to each client's quirks. Richard told me often, "Your brother sees the future, but you've built our present. Both matter." I clung to those words whenever Marcus dismissed me in meetings calling my work legacy tech. Legacy, as though the backbone of the company were a relic. The irony was sharp. Marcus wanted modernization, but Core X was years ahead of its time. I had written my own machine learning routing algorithms before the term trended. I had integrated cloud redundancies long before Marcus pitched them as a new initiative. He didn't understand that my so-called homemade system was a living organism, one I nourished daily quietly, without applause. When Dad retired after minor heart troubles, I wasn't surprised the board chose Marcus as managing director. He had charisma handshakes and polished words. I had a track record buried in code. But what did sting was how quickly he acted as if Dad's shadow had barely cleared before Marcus wanted his own mark stamped across the company. The termination papers weren't just a dismissal. They were a declaration that 15 years of my life were expendable. Yet beneath the sting was clarity. I knew what Marcus didn't. Core X wasn't a product you could unplug and swap out. It was muscle memory coded into every operational vein. Migrating away from it without me was like trying to transplant a heart without a surgeon. The board never knew this. Marcus never cared to ask. They thought technology was plug and play, a vendor swap away. They believed innovation meant whatever buzzword was on the cover of Forbes. What they didn't understand was that true innovation had already been quietly humming under their feet for years, unglamorous but unshakable. I told myself not to care anymore. That night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by stacks of binders, each one filled with diagrams, notes, contingency plans. Only a fraction had ever been uploaded to official documentation. Not because I hoarded knowledge maliciously, but because the system was alive. Documenting it was like trying to pin a butterfly to a board. By the time you finished, the real thing had already changed shape. As I flipped through one binder, I thought of the clients who relied on us, warehouses that scheduled shifts according to Core X forecasts, truckers whose routes changed by the minute, vendors whose payments were triggered automatically. They didn't see me, but they lived inside my code every day. And now Marcus wanted to rip that out. In the quiet of my apartment, I let the anger harden into something steadier. For years, I had assumed my work would speak for itself, that if I was indispensable, I would be safe. But families, even family businesses, don't always work on logic. They work on pride, appearances, and in Marcus's case, ego. The thought should have crushed me. Instead, it clarified something I had ignored for years. Perhaps it was time to stop being indispensable for people who refused to see my worth. Perhaps it was time to let Core X speak on my behalf in the only language Marcus would understand: consequences. 3 days after Marcus slid the termination papers across the desk, I found myself in unfamiliar territory: silence. For 15 years, my life had pulsed with the heartbeat of Core X. Pings, alerts, urgent calls at all hours. The system was as demanding as a child. And like a child, it had grown under my care, stubborn and brilliant. Now, without it clamoring for my attention, mornings stretched long and empty. I woke later than I ever had made real breakfasts, instead of grabbing cold toast on the way out, and even sat with a novel I hadn't finished 2 years ago. At first, the quiet felt like theft. Then, it felt like oxygen. Still, the absence of noise left space for guilt to creep in. I imagined the Carter Line offices buzzing with Novatech consultants in slim suits, Marcus gesturing at screens like a ringmaster. I could almost hear him: "We're modernizing. We're leaving outdated systems behind." And I wondered, did he even realize the wires he was cutting? The irony was that Marcus believed he'd freed himself from me, but in truth, I'd freed myself from him. He'd made his choice, and I was beginning to make mine. That third morning, I was halfway through my second cup of coffee on the balcony when my phone buzzed. Naomi Brooks, Her name flashing across the screen gave me an odd tug of loyalty. She had been one of the few colleagues who saw me not just as a function, but as a person. Elena, her voice burst through before I could say hello. Are you watching this? Watching what? The Westbridge presentation. It's live. Dylan? Marcus. He's streaming to every department. He's showing off Core X. Oh God. The noise in the background grew frantic. It's happening again. I rushed inside, fingers flying to open my tablet. Somehow, my credentials still worked. On screen, Carterline's largest conference room came into view. Marcus stood before a gleaming projection sleeves, rolled just enough to look approachable, smile fixed like armor. Behind him, Core X's dashboard pulsed my dashboard, my code. This system guarantees 99.8% on-time delivery, Marcus declared, his voice dripping with confidence. Complete transparency across the supply chain. Then the dashboard flickered. A cascade of error messages bloomed across the screen like wildfire. Red warnings, frozen inputs. A black banner slashed across database integrity compromised. System lockdown initiated. I didn't even need to guess. I knew. The integrity protocols I'd built years ago had been triggered. After a corrupted patch nearly destroyed our data, I'd woven in a failsafe. If Core X sensed potential corruption, it would lock down instantly, refusing all inputs until a very specific sequence of commands and authentications were entered. I had been the only one to ever perform it. Marcus kept talking for several seconds before realizing the room wasn't breathing with him anymore. He turned, blinked at the frozen screen, and stammered. Just a momentary glitch. He tapped his tablet furiously. Nothing. The errors multiplied. My chest tightened. A strange blend of satisfaction and dread. This was the very thing I had warned about. Systems aren't plug and play. They're ecosystems. Mishandle them and they bite. Within minutes, reports scrolled across the emergency channels. Terminals offline in 3 warehouses. Labels not generating. Trucks idle. Drivers waiting in parking lots with nowhere to go. Billing frozen. $50,000 lost for every passing hour. My phone exploded with calls. IT staff begging for codes. Operations managers pleading. Even Marcus himself call after call. I silenced the device, staring at the screen as Westbridge executives gathered their papers and walked out. Then came the call I wasn't expecting. Richard Carter, my father. Elena. His voice was rougher than I remembered, not commanding, shaken. The system's down. I know, I said quietly. I'm watching it happen. Marcus says it's a fundamental flaw, that your architecture finally collapsed. I laughed bitterly. Of course he does. But he's wrong. Core X isn't failing. It's protecting itself from whatever Novatech tried to ram into it. Silence. Then his voice softer. Can you fix it? The question knifed me in two. Could I? Absolutely. Would I? That was harder. My loyalty to Carterline ran deep. To the employees. To the truckers and managers who had worked shoulder to shoulder with me for years. But my loyalty to Marcus. To the board who dismissed me as legacy, that reservoir was dry. I don't work for Carterline anymore, Dad, I said finally. Marcus made that clear. Elena, this isn't about Marcus. There are 300 families depending on paychecks and clients depending on shipments. You can save them. I pressed my palm against the cool glass of the balcony door, staring out at the skyline. The guilt gnawed at me. But the wounded part of me, the part that signed termination papers, while Marcus smirked, refused to bend. Then, Marcus should have thought of that before firing the only person who understands the system. I replied, he has Novatech now. Aren't they supposed to be the saviors? Elena, I have a job interview in an hour, Dad. I have to go. That wasn't a lie. Horizon Logistics had been circling for years, trying to lure me away. The day after Marcus fired me, their CTO Daniel Ortiz had sent an offer to meet. I had ignored it at first, too raw to think. But now, as I slipped into a navy suit and tied back my hair, I thought maybe freedom had a different name. The interview went better than I dared hope. Daniel's team asked sharp questions, not just about results, but about philosophy, about how to build resilient systems, how to scale without breaking. They listened, really listened. "You've been trapped under family politics," Daniel said as he walked me out. "We'd give you what you deserve: a team, autonomy, equity. Your name on the architecture." He handed me a folder. "Take your time. Our offer speaks for itself." I opened it in my car. Nearly double my salary at Carterline. Substantial equity. The title of Chief Technology Officer. I stared at the page, heart pounding. For years, I'd been the ghost in the system, critical but invisible. Now someone was offering to make me real. Back at home, my phone buzzed with messages: Marcus raging, E.T. begging, Naomi pleading, and then a final message that made my blood run cold. "Board emergency meeting in progress. Marcus is blaming you for sabotage." Sabotage. The word tasted like poison. 15 years of building, protecting, patching at 2 a.m, and now I was painted as the enemy. My jaw tightened. I hadn't sabotaged a thing. Marcus's ignorance had lit the fire. But maybe I was done putting it out for him. The evening after the Westbridge disaster, I sat on my couch with a glass of red wine. CoreX's silent alerts still buzzing faintly in the back of my mind like phantom limbs. My inbox was flooded pleas from Carterline staff. Angry board members, even a curt message from Marcus himself: "Fix this now or face legal consequences." Legal consequences. The hypocrisy nearly made me laugh. I hadn't sabotaged anything. My code was doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect itself from reckless intrusion. But truth rarely mattered more than appearances. And Marcus was a master at twisting appearances. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened Horizon's folder again. The offer gleamed from the page, a mirror of everything Carterline had denied me: title, equity, authority, recognition. For the first time in years, my stomach fluttered with possibility instead of dread. Then the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Marcus. His normally immaculate hair was mussed. His tie loosened his eyes, carrying a flicker of panic he couldn't disguise. Against my better judgment, I opened the door just enough to lean on the frame. "You win, okay?" he blurted before I could speak. "I was wrong. We need you. I need you." The words should have felt vindicating. Instead, they landed hollow. He didn't need me. He needed what lived inside my head. "The board is furious," Marcus continued, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "They're threatening emergency leadership changes." Westbridge walked. "Dad's disappointed. Everyone's blaming me." "As they should," I said coolly. "You fired the architect of the system that runs the company. That's not just short-sighted. It's negligent." He flinched but didn't argue. "Tell me what you want. Name your price to fix this." I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. Then I pulled Horizon's folder from the coffee table and flipped it open, sliding it toward him. "Horizon Logistics wants me to build them exactly what I built for Carterline," I said evenly. "This is what they think I'm worth." His eyes scanned the page. His lips tightened. "This is outrageous. They're just trying to steal our technology through you." I shook my head. "No, they're recognizing my value, something you and the board never did." I closed the folder. "If I return to Carterline, it won't be as your subordinate. I want a board seat, title of Chief Technology Officer, equal compensation to yours, and complete autonomy over the technical division." His jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. The board will never." "Then enjoy explaining how you'll rebuild 15 years of proprietary code from scratch while hemorrhaging clients and millions of dollars," I interrupted. My tone was calm, measured. "I'm sure the shareholders will be understanding when the stock plummets." A tense silence filled the room. Marcus looked like he was choking on his pride, but desperation shone through. "The board meets again tomorrow morning," he finally said. "I'll present your terms. I can't guarantee they'll accept everything." "That's fine," I said, "but I won't touch a line of code until they do. The system stays down until my conditions are met." He left without another word, shoulders hunched in defeat. I watched him from the window as he climbed into his sleek black car. For the first time, I saw not a confident managing director, but a man drowning in waters he had chosen without learning how to swim. When the door closed behind him, I exhaled deeply. Relief, fear, something that felt suspiciously like triumph. The next morning, Carterline's boardroom smelled of panic. I knew because whispers filtered back to me through Naomi, who texted updates like dispatches from a battlefield. Operations across 3 states frozen, client escalations mounting, estimated losses nearly 1.5 million. At 9:00 a.m., Marcus called. His voice was strained. The board has accepted your conditions. Board seat, CTO title, equal comp, autonomy. It's all in writing. Just, please, Elena, fix it. The words I had waited a lifetime to hear. Not from Marcus, but from the universe itself recognition. I walked into Carterline headquarters that afternoon, wearing a tailored charcoal suit I'd once bought for conferences, but rarely dared to wear. Heads turned in the lobby. Whispers followed me down the hall. For years I'd been invisible, just the tech person. Now eyes tracked me like gravity itself had shifted. In the boardroom, 12 pairs of eyes locked on me. My father sat at the end of the table, weary but attentive. Marcus stood at the front, a shadow of his usual self. Behind him, a projection displayed the outage metrics, 27 hours of downtime, over 1 million in losses, 42 delayed shipments, 17 escalated clients. Ms. Carter has agreed to restore our systems, Marcus announced stiffly. The formal address wasn't lost on me. Neither was the tension in his jaw. I set my laptop on the table and opened the Core X master interface. The board members leaned forward, curiosity etched into their faces. Before I begin, I said, my voice steady, let me be clear. The system failure wasn't sabotage or poor design. It was a security protocol I implemented years ago to prevent catastrophic data corruption. When Novatech attempted unauthorized integration, Core X did exactly what it was designed to do, protect itself. Gasps rippled around the table. On the projection, I pulled back the dashboard skin to reveal a complex lattice of indicators, override sequences, and contingency checks. This, I explained, is the real Core X. The competitive edge Carterline has depended on for 15 years. It cannot be replaced by an off-the-shelf solution or a rushed migration. It must be understood, respected. I let the silence hang, then added, and now led by me. The board members nodded. Even Marcus's eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in years, humility. Within an hour, systems were restored. Warehouses came back online. Drivers received routing updates. Celebratory messages poured in from managers. Relief spread like wildfire. But more important than the recovery was what came after the shift in how they saw me. Not as Marcus's older sister, not as a background coder, but as a leader. And I knew as I walked back into my new office on the executive floor that this was only the beginning. My new office was on the executive floor, bigger, brighter, and lined with glass walls that overlooked the skyline of Pittsburgh. For years, I had been tucked into a corner of the operations wing, close to the hum of servers and the smell of stale coffee. Now, my desk faced Marcus's. We were neighbors, equals in proximity, if not in spirit. The plaque on my desk read, Elena Carter, Chief Technology Officer Board Member. For the first time, my title matched my reality. The days that followed the Core X meltdown were a whirlwind. Restoring the system was only the first step. I immediately reorganized the IT department. Documentation, once an afterthought, became non-negotiable. Training sessions multiplied. I insisted that at least 3 senior engineers learn the reset sequence and underlying architecture. No one, especially not me, should ever again be the single point of failure. Some on the team eyed me warily, at first unsure if I was the saboteur Marcus had painted me to be. But once they saw how quickly I unraveled problems, how I explained without condescension, their skepticism softened into trust. Marcus kept his distance. He passed me in the hallway with curt nods, speaking only in clipped, professional phrases. Our private sibling dynamic was buried under layers of corporate protocol. That was fine by me. Respect was better currency than false warmth. The board, however, had shifted entirely. Suddenly, I was no longer the technical footnote at meetings. Margaret Liu, the longest-serving member, leaned toward me whenever system-related matters came up. Others asked my opinion directly bypassing Marcus. The power balance had tilted. Subtly, but undeniably. The most surprising change came from my father. Richard Carter requested coffee one morning, the old ritual we hadn't shared since before Marcus took over. We met at a quiet cafe, and he seemed smaller somehow. Age had worn the sharpness from his jawline, and the authority he once carried effortlessly now wavered. "I always thought Marcus would lead," he admitted after a long sip of black coffee. He reminded me of myself, charming, ambitious, a natural at networking. "But watching what you did last week, I realize now. You're the one who built the foundation. You're the one who innovated. I should have recognized that sooner." I swallowed the lump in my throat. His words were late, but they mattered. "I wasn't looking for apologies," I said softly. "I just needed acknowledgement." "You have it," he replied. For years, I had lived in Marcus's shadow, letting him take the spotlight while I built the machinery that kept the company alive. Now the spotlight had turned not by demand, but by necessity. Novatech's contract was renegotiated almost immediately. Their consultants now worked with my team, not above it. Their flashy digital transformation reduced to collaborative enhancements under my oversight. The arrogance they once exuded had evaporated after their humiliation in front of Westbridge. They were deferential, now careful. The stock, which had dipped sharply during the outage, stabilized as clients returned and operations resumed. Analysts praised Carter Line's resilience under new technical leadership. My name appeared in trade journals, mentioned as the architect behind Core X. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. But visibility came with pressure. Every decision I made was scrutinized. Every email could be leaked. Every win carried the weight of proving that my promotion wasn't a desperate bandage, but a justified investment. I felt it at night in the quiet hours, staring at my ceiling. The cost of recognition was responsibility. Still, the victories outweighed the anxieties. One Friday afternoon, Naomi dropped by my new office with a grin. "It's surreal," she said, setting a latte on my desk. "You're finally where you belong. Did you ever think this day would come?" I glanced at the skyline. I dreamed of it, but I never thought it would happen like this. She leaned closer. "Do you ever regret coming back? You could have taken Horizon's offer." Her question lingered. I thought about Daniel Ortiz's enthusiasm, the freedom of a clean slate, the equity package that still sat in my drawer. Horizon had promised a future, but Carter Line was my past, and now my present. Core X was more than code. It was blood, sweat, years of sacrifice. Walking away had felt like abandoning a part of myself. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it, but I won't forget I have options." Naomi smiled knowingly. "Good. Keep that leverage. Marcus won't stop trying to undercut you." She wasn't wrong. My brother's pride was wounded, but not gone. I caught glimpses of his frustration in board meetings when members looked to me instead of him, in the way his jaw tightened when clients asked to speak with me about technical roadmaps. He had lost ground, and he knew it. Yet he never confronted me directly, perhaps because he feared another collapse, or perhaps because deep down he finally understood the truth. I wasn't just his sister. I was the safeguard of everything he depended on. That night, as I slipped off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine, I looked at the new business cards scattered across my desk. Elena Carter, Chief Technology Officer, Board Member. For years, I had waited for someone else to validate my worth. Now the validation was undeniable, but the deeper change was internal. I no longer needed Marcus's approval, or even my father's. I had reclaimed power on my terms, and I vowed never to give it away again. The company's recovery had stabilized, but the tension between Marcus and me lingered like static in the air. We moved through the same hallways, sat in the same boardroom, but every interaction was wrapped in ice. He played the part of managing director, yet I could see in his eyes the simmering resentment. My rise had cut into his authority, and no amount of polished smiles could hide it. 3 weeks after the outage, the reckoning arrived. It began in a board meeting. Margaret Liu had just finished reviewing client retention reports, showing how many contracts were saved by the swift restoration of Core X. "Elena's team deserves credit for that," she said plainly. "Without her, we'd be bleeding clients." Heads nodded. Even Richard, our father, gave a rare approving smile in my direction. Marcus shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. He leaned forward, fingers laced, voice smooth but sharp. "Yes, Elena did well. But let's not forget our reliance on a single proprietary system is exactly what put us in danger. We cannot allow ourselves to be held hostage by one person's knowledge." The word hostage hit like a slap. I kept my expression neutral, but my pulse quickened. "With all due respect," I said evenly, "Core X didn't fail. It defended itself. What happened was a misuse by Novatech and a lack of proper transition planning." Marcus smirked. Or perhaps it was poor documentation by the system's creator. Gasps echoed softly around the table. My hands tightened into fists beneath the desk, but I forced my voice calm. "I've already begun addressing documentation gaps, and multiple team members now understand the architecture. No one person will ever hold the keys again. That was my initiative, not yours." A low murmur of agreement moved through the room. Marcus's face reddened, and for a moment, I saw the boy he had been always desperate to win, even if it meant undermining others. After the meeting, he cornered me in the corridor. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "The board's dazzled by your little system. But don't forget who runs this company." I met his glare head-on. "Runs it into the ground, maybe. Marcus, I saved Carterline. If you can't respect that, at least step aside and stop sabotaging me." His eyes darkened. "You'll never be more than a coder who got lucky." I almost laughed. If luck looks like saving a multi-million-dollar corporation from collapse, I'll take it. He stormed off, and I knew this wasn't over. That night, I sat in my apartment, Core X's alert console glowing faintly on my laptop. Naomi called. "Word is, Marcus is pushing for another vote, something about reducing your autonomy. Watch your back." I sighed. Of course. Marcus couldn't accept defeat. "Thank you," I told her. "If he wants a war, I'll be ready." The next morning, war arrived early. I was sipping coffee in my office when my phone buzzed. A message from Lauren Patel in HR. "Marcus is rallying the board. Claims you overstepped authority and endangered operations. Emergency session this afternoon." I leaned back in my chair, steadying my breath. It was absurd everyone knew Core X had saved us. But Marcus had charisma, and charisma swayed votes. At the emergency session, he laid out his case with the confidence of a salesman. "Yes, my sister saved the day, but we can't ignore the risks. She operates without oversight. She's consolidated power in IT. This isn't healthy governance." I let him speak. When my turn came, I rose and connected my laptop to the projector. "Here's what Marcus calls consolidation," I began. On the screen, graphs displayed recovery metrics: lost revenue, recaptured client satisfaction, restored efficiency, gains from new documentation protocols. And here are the risks we faced because of his decisions: firing the system architect, dismissing technical warnings, hiring Novatech without due diligence. I clicked to the next slide, a timeline of events. Each misstep traced back to Marcus's choices. Gasps rippled again. "This isn't about consolidation," I said, voice firm. "It's about accountability." The board sat in stunned silence. Richard finally broke it. "Marcus, you acted rashly. Elena prevented disaster. I suggest we end this session before more damage is done." Marcus's face turned crimson. He muttered something under his breath and sat heavily. As the meeting adjourned, Margaret Liu caught my eye and mouthed a single word: "Brilliant." That night, Marcus appeared at my apartment again. But this time, he didn't smirk. He looked exhausted, beaten. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. I studied him, unsure if he was seeking understanding or looking for another angle. "I'm not doing this to you," I said softly. "I'm doing this for the company, for myself, for everyone who depends on Carterline." His shoulders slumped. For once, there was no fight left in him. "I never thought I'd be overshadowed by you," he admitted bitterly. "Dad always said I'd be the one to lead." "Maybe you were supposed to," I said. "But leadership isn't about titles. It's about responsibility. And when the crisis came, you looked away. I didn't." He stared at me for a long moment, then left without another word. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. The sibling reckoning wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt I'd truly won a round. The weeks that followed felt like living in a different universe. For the first time in years, my work wasn't invisible. It wasn't treated like plumbing, important only when it broke. It was recognized, respected, even celebrated. Carterline steadied itself. Core X hummed like a living organism, every server pulse, an algorithmic decision running as I'd always designed it. Warehouses were back on schedule. Clients who had wavered began renewing contracts. Even Westbridge, the account Dylan had fumbled so spectacularly, reached out again after hearing about the swift recovery. At board meetings, I sat at the polished mahogany table, not as the quiet sister with her laptop, but as an equal. When technical discussions arose, all eyes turned to me. I spoke plainly, directly, not with the flourish Marcus favored, but with facts and clarity. And people listened. The press picked up the story. Carterline's CTO saves firm from digital catastrophe, one headline read. Another called me the architect behind Pittsburgh's smartest logistics platform. For once, the narrative wasn't about Marcus's vision or Richard's legacy. It was about my work, about me. But with recognition came reflection. Late one evening, I stood alone in the server room. The cool air hummed against my skin, the blinking lights forming constellations of effort I'd poured in over 15 years. I thought about the girl I had been, the one who coded in silence, believing her work would speak for itself. The woman who accepted being overlooked because fighting felt exhausting. And I realized I wasn't that woman anymore. I'd fought. I demanded respect. And I'd won not by sabotaging, not by tearing down, but by standing my ground until there was no choice but acknowledgement. Marcus and I remained distant. In meetings, we spoke like colleagues, polite and formal. At family dinners, rare as they were, we exchanged small talk, but the warmth we once had was gone. And maybe that was fine. Respect was enough. Richard, though, changed. One morning at our now regular coffee meeting, he looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen since childhood. "I was wrong," he said simply. "All these years, I thought leadership was about charisma, about who could charm a room. But I see now leadership is about building something that lasts. You've done that, Elena. More than I ever did." I didn't need his validation anymore, but hearing it eased something inside me. The most surprising part, my phone buzzed constantly with offers. Horizon Logistics renewed their proposal even sweeter than before. Other firms dangled executive titles and stock options. The industry had noticed. I had options now. But for the moment, I stayed. Carterline was part of me. Core X was my creation, my fingerprint across 15 years of data and decisions. Leaving now would feel like abandoning a child before it was ready to walk alone. One Friday afternoon, I received a shipment of new business cards. The embossed letters gleamed under the office lights. Elena Carter, Chief Technology Officer, Board Member. I held the card between my fingers, feeling its weight, and smiled. Naomi popped her head in, grinning. "So Ms. CTO ready to rule the world?" "Not rule," I said, setting the card down. "Just ready to finally be seen." We both laughed. That night, I walked home under the Pittsburgh skyline. The air was crisp, the city buzzing with the rhythm of Friday evenings. I thought about the journey, about humiliation turning into vindication, about the brother who had underestimated me, about the father who had finally admitted what I'd known all along, that my work mattered, that I mattered. For years, I had been dismissed, minimized, told to stay in my lane, but I had stayed true to myself, and when the moment came, I didn't bend. And that was enough. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't sabotage or seeing your enemies fail. Sometimes it's standing your ground until the truth is undeniable. Sometimes it's being recognized not because you begged for it, but because you proved it beyond question. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside, remember this. Your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. It's defined by the work you build, the values you hold, and the moment you finally demand to be seen. Thank you for listening. If Elena's journey struck a chord, share your thoughts, share this story, and subscribe for more stories that linger long after they're told.